Chapter 13. By the time their hired conveyance pulled into Nottingham, Charlotte's bones were exhausted from so many days of travel. Scotland seemed like a century ago. Her heart, however, was yearning to hope again. Not in a childhood dream of a long-lost father who would sweep her into a new life, but in the flesh-and-blood man seated next to her in the carriage. Anthony's unshakable faith that good fortune was always right around the corner was baffling, but infectious. Perhaps this time luck would find them both. She tried to be cautious, tried to fight the unexpected sense of comfort she felt in his presence. It couldn't last, yet she wished it could. Impulsively, she turned to hold his strong, handsome face in her hands and press her lips to his as if this might be their last chance. He cupped the back of her head as he responded in kind, his mouth as hungry as her own. She let him hold her close. There was nowhere else she preferred to be than in his embrace. One by one, she extinguished every sense except for their kiss. The clatter of the carriage disappeared until all she could hear was the beating of her heart. The jarring bounce of stiff wheels over uneven road vanished, as did the chill of the night air whistling through the carriage door. All she felt was the strength in his arms, the heat of his embrace, the dizzying taste of his mouth covering hers. Another woman might wish such a kiss would never stop. Not Charlotte. She hoped it would occur again and again, that her future would be filled with 1,000 passionate kisses, safe in the arms of this man. His presence would always make her feel as though she'd slipped into a dream, a place where she was the thing that mattered most, where every kiss was a promise of 5 more to come. She would never take him for granted. Charlotte didn't pull away until her lungs were out of breath and her heart was in grave danger of surrendering itself completely. Anthony stared at her, his eyes heavy-lidded with arousal. His slow smile was as dazed as her own. "What was that for? Tell me, so I can be sure to do it again." "For being you?" She could tell he didn't believe her, but the truth was both as simple and as alarming as that. He was such a joy to be around. Easy to talk to, easy to travel with, easy to kiss until every beat of her heart pulsed with his name. "Nottingham," the Jarvey called out. "Shall I take a few laps about the square, or do you want to go straight to an inn?" Cheeks burning, she jerked back to the other side of the carriage and tried to arrange herself as demurely as possible. Anthony's eyes met hers. "Definitely the inn." She tried to slant him a quelling look, but ended up smiling back at him instead. With Anthony, there was never a reason for shame or embarrassment. Every moment was simply part of the adventure they were building together. "Any specific inn?" the Jarvey asked. "There's 3 up ahead." Anthony glanced out of the window and feigned deep thought. He tilted his head toward Charlotte. "Are you in a White Lion sort of humour? Or are you feeling a bit more haystack and horseshoe today?" "With a full moon tonight?" she teased back. "Only a White Lion can protect us." "The lady has chosen the second inn on the left," Anthony informed the driver. As the Jarvey steered his horses in front of the White Lion, another carriage pulled to a stop a few yards behind them. "Popular choice." Anthony smiled at Charlotte in approval. "Must be a wise decision." Popular. Her earlier elation faded at the idea of staying somewhere fashionable enough that she was likely to be recognized. She might have just ruined their adventure. Although she tried her hardest to stay out of sight, sharing a face with a courtesan made attempts at anonymity laughable. Most men of a certain set knew who her mother was, many of them intimately. Gentlemen, with presumptuous comments and shameless leers, were the best of the lot. Others simply assumed, like a mother like daughter, and yanked her into the nearest shadow with every expectation of enjoying a quick tup. It was embarrassing, infuriating, and demeaning. And it would be all the worse when it happened in front of Anthony. He still saw her as a respectable woman. As a person. She didn't want to change his mind. As he handed her down from the carriage, a short man with a limp and a scuffed black beaver hat alighted from the coach that had pulled up behind them. She frowned. Not a man. The same man with a limp she'd seen at the inn back in Scotland. Her stomach hollowed. For the man in the scuffed hat to show up at the same randomly selected inn, 200 miles south, having matched their grueling breakneck pace. It was more than an improbable coincidence. Her skin went cold. They were being followed. "Anthony," she hissed, then stepped in front of him to block the approaching gentleman's view. Her heart thundered. "The debt collectors have found us." "I'll handle it." He eased in front of her, stepping directly into harm's way. His voice lowered when he caught sight of the man. "Was that gentleman one of the other guests at the Kitty and Cock Inn?" "Yes," she whispered back. "Should we run for it? Our luggage is still in the hackney." He shook his head slowly in confusion. "That's not one of the enforcers." She blinked. "Then who is it?" "Dashed if I know." Anthony's eyes narrowed. "But he's coming this way." She wrapped her arms about her chest and tried not to panic. "Excuse me, miss," the man called out. Anthony stepped forward. "She is my wife." "Ma'am," the man corrected. He bowed in haste. "Sir, could I speak to your wife for a moment? Alone?" Dread sent her a step back. Who was this presumptuous man? A client of her mother's? He couldn't possibly mean to insult her beneath her husband's nose, could he? Anthony crossed his arms. "I'm not leaving her side." The man cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I couldn't help but notice the distinctive ruby earrings you were wearing at the Kitty and Cock Inn. Do you mind telling me how they came to be in your possession?" Her stomach turned at the unspoken implication. He thought she'd stolen them. The irony heated her cheeks. She'd worn the rubies so her father would recognize her, and instead had labelled herself as a thief. "He has no claim to your jewellery," Anthony murmured into her ear. "You don't have to answer." But of course she did. People like her never stopped having to defend themselves against insinuation and accusation. "They were my mother's," she blurted. "And before that, my father's, I think." The man's blank expression did not change. "I see. Who is your father, ma'am?" Her throat closed. She could not answer. There was nothing to say. "Never mind him, Charlotte," Anthony murmured again. "He's no one." It was too late. All her newfound self-assurance had already fled, leaving her shoulders as deflated as her confidence. Very well. If this man had come all the way from Scotland to accuse her of something, he must have had a reason. It was better to deal with suspicion before it had the opportunity to spiral even more out of control. "I don't know who my father is," she answered quietly, unable to meet the man's eyes. "There's no way to tell." "As it happens, ma'am," he lowered his hat, "that's not precisely true." Her startled gaze jerked up. "Who are you?" Anthony snarled. "Mr. Ralph Underwood, Esquire, one of the Duke of Cortland's solicitors, and a trusted adviser." The man gestured at Charlotte. "And this is His Grace's daughter." She gaped at the strange man in disbelief, then burst out laughing at such a ridiculous mistake. "I can assure you my birth had no such noble beginnings. You have me confused with someone far more fortunate than I." "The set you were wearing," the solicitor continued, "has belonged to the Cortland family for several generations. Now that I have had a closer look, I am certain. Those jewels are part of a collection that includes not just a necklace and earrings, but also a matching bracelet and tiara. The latter two pieces remain at the Cortland country estate." This wasn't a mistake? "I don't understand," Charlotte stammered. "Perhaps the rubies were once part of a set, but I cannot possibly be related to a duke. My mother—" The solicitor withdrew a folded parchment from a pocket inside his greatcoat and studied the cramped handwriting covering one side. "Are you the sole offspring of one Judith Devon of London?" "Yes." she croaked through a suddenly raspy throat. She had been born with the stigma of her mother's profession, but she would not deny their connection. Up until last week, her mother was all Charlotte had ever had. "In that case, I am in possession of a document signed by His Grace's own hand, indicating you are indeed his daughter." His Grace's daughter? Charlotte sagged backwards against Anthony. A duke, signed by his own hand. She tried to process the solicitor's claim. Her father wasn't a laird. He was a lord. Her child's mind had muddled the two, and her mother had never corrected the mistake. She'd simply added to his legend. "Not Scotland," she whispered in stupefaction. "Cortland." Her mind was spinning. She might still be a courtesan's byblow, but she wasn't merely one of many such unfortunate bastard children. She was the daughter of a duke, one who recognized her, in writing. She grabbed Anthony's hands, giddy with joy. He grinned back at her. "I have a father!" she choked out, half laughing, half crying. The world was so much brighter than it had been mere moments before. "Anthony, I have a father!" "Actually, Ma'am, I'm afraid you had one." The solicitor cleared his throat. "A few weeks ago, His Grace passed away at his London home." An icy breeze whipped straight through Charlotte's heart, ripping away every trace of the joy she should have known better than to believe in. Of course she would never meet him. Girls like her didn't get to have fathers, not even for a moment. A great hollow void spread through her, replacing her excitement with devastation. Her father had known who she was, had known that he had sired her. Worse, as a member of the House of Lords, he'd lived at least half the year in London. Every year, an hour's journey at the most from where a scared, lonely little girl rocked herself every night on her bedchamber floor, staring at her locked door and dreaming of a different life, of a father who could whisk her away from the fear and the self-loathing and the endless humiliations. As it turned out, her father could have whisked her away, or taken her out for ices, or visited her, just once. Something, anything. It would have meant the world to her. And now he was dead. Now that she finally knew who he was, finally knew where to find him, she would never get to meet him, never spend a single moment in his presence. Not because she was too late, but because he hadn't cared enough to bother back when he still had time. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked dully, as if every word, every breath didn't rake open all the old scars guarding her heart. "I never knew him. He's dead. Nothing matters anymore." The solicitor coughed. "Actually, Ma'am," realization hit her. Do his real children want the jewels back? Of course they did. They were the important ones, the children who mattered. She tore open her reticule, shoved the necklace at Anthony and the earrings. "Sell them back for as high a price as you can get." She gasped, hated how, even now, relinquishing the jewels felt like carving off the most important part of her. "And keep the money. Those stones mean nothing. I can't bear for them to touch my skin." Anthony put his arm around her and held her close. The solicitor cleared his throat. "Ma'am, you needn't surrender the rubies, at least not yet, but your presence is required at the Cortland House in Mayfair 1 week from today for the reading of his will. Next Tuesday, at 1 o'clock sharp." She stared at him, uncomprehendingly. "For the... what?" "Until the bequests are read, I have no way to know if His Grace has settled a sum upon you, or a bit of land, or perhaps the other ruby pieces to complete the set. But as a named party in the will, I'd like to offer you my services to help manage any windfall you might receive." He touched his lapel. "For a fee, of course." She was too drained of all humour to laugh even half-heartedly at the solicitor's blatant mercenariness. The man had shown up out of nowhere, had given her more joy, more tangible reasons to believe in her future than she'd ever had in her life. then immediately destroyed every hope he'd just helped to sow. And now he wanted part of whatever her father had left her? Or worse, what if he was lying? "How did you find me?" She didn't bother to hide the suspicion from her voice. The solicitor had the grace to look somewhat abashed. "I glimpsed the rubies when you were dining at a posting house across the Scottish border and was convinced they were Cortland's, but I had to be certain. I waited until I saw you only wear the earrings, not the necklace, and I sneaked into your chamber to confirm my suspicions." "You broke into my chamber?" Fury exploded from her chest. "How dare you?" He lifted a shoulder. "I had to know for certain. What if they weren't the same jewels? What if you weren't his daughter? What if I had bashed in your head with a fire iron?" Anthony growled. "My duty is to his Grace's dukedom." The solicitor lifted his nose. "What if the family jewels had fallen into the hands of someone without Cortland blood?" "Heaven forbid," she said sarcastically. Damn the pompous solicitor, and damn her father for not caring about his daughter until he was already in his grave. "Be advised that his Grace is unlikely to have left you anything substantive," the solicitor warned her. "Illegitimate children are unseemly for a duke, but in the event he bequeathed you something of value, I am at your service." For a fee? Charlotte's fingernails dug into her palms. To the devil with the Duke and his solicitor both. She didn't even want whatever her father had left her. The only reason she was still listening was in case she could help Anthony. To get the best price for the rubies, they would have to go to London, and she would have to withstand the inevitable snubs and degradation that came with it. "Here's the address." The solicitor handed her an array of papers. "And a contract, should you desire my aid. You will see that your interests will be well protected from your family, from solicitors, perhaps even from your own husband, should you wish. You need only to sign the document and I will represent you." "That will do," Anthony snapped. He wrapped his arm about Charlotte's shoulders. "I believe you've helped enough for one day." Her chest wouldn't stop pounding. She stumbled when she tried to walk away. Her mind was too full of regret and yearning, too focused on the father she could have had, if she had but known his name years ago. The solicitor tipped his hat and turned away, then paused to glance back over his shoulder at Charlotte. "Oh, and, Mom, I'm sorry for your loss." A half-laugh, half-sob ripped up from her heart and tangled in her throat. Such false words. No one was sorrier for her loss than Charlotte. The loss of her father, the loss of opportunity, the loss of her dreams, the loss of her belief that, if her father had only known she existed, he might have loved her enough to save her, might have even saved them both.